Hi, Renee. Let me fix my name so it lists my name properly.
It says Creative Machines.
Right. Well, that's my company. I'm Joe.
Joseph, yes. I saw your
I
picture.
go by Joseph in art because people said, well, Joe sounds like somebody who just like grinds on car hoods and then
Oh,
sprays.
that is so not true. Oh, Joseph sounds like he could be an artist. So how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fine, fine. Oh God, I have so many questions to ask you.
Well, let's go ahead.
I read your website. It's like so awesome. Wow.
It's a struggle every day. You just see the best parts on the website.
Well, I want to hear all the juicy parts. The first question I was really curious about, were you originally an artist, a sculptor, or were you an engineer, or both?
Well, it's kind of neither. I'll give you the 5-minute story. So I grew up a maker, meaning so my grandfather had been friends with Thomas Edison's younger son, and he was always fiddling around and making things. He worked on voting machines in Newark, New Jersey, and he was just a wonderful, sociable person, my maternal grandfather. And then on my father's side, I had heard growing up that we were descendants from Daniel O'Connell. He was called the Liberator. He was the one who campaigned for the freedom of the Irish people. He was also one of the first abolitionists in Europe at great political cost to himself. Obama went over in 2008 to Ireland and made a special point to remind the world of that history. And so we thought growing up that we had this legacy to live up to. And the family Bible that records that was lost. And I've been trying to trace the genealogy, and the genealogist I worked with said, well, it's kind of questionable. But when you have had that sort of mantle of thinking you have to live up to this great political and social reformer, well, you do it. And my dad spent his life teaching math in inner city Newark. But also making things. So he would come home, and because both my parents were educators, we spent a lot of time with them, my sisters and I, and they would set up workbenches for us. And so sometimes people say, did you grow up, people place too much emphasis on money, but true riches are a stable family, health, an extended family, a house full of books. We could not afford some of the toys. Like, I didn't grow up playing with Legos, and I see people who grew up with Legos and they make things that are very blocky.
Yeah, but when we grew up, you were taught to use your mind, to be creative, to create the tools you needed to play with. But they made things and they used their imagination.
We did. And I know in previous generations, even more, when you see this toy possessions that people had and the way they could transform with their imagination.
Yes.
And then just yesterday, I was getting my hair cut at a barber, and I guess his granddaughter, a young Mexican girl who's bilingual, and I'm learning Spanish, so I was able to talk to her a little bit. She had this piece of cloth, and she'd fold it one way and it was her doll, and she'd fold it the other way and it was a cape, and then she'd fold it another way and it was like a witch into the air, just with a piece of cloth. And I love that inventivity.
Yes, that's what kids are lacking nowadays.
I think so, but we were encouraged, and our house was just filled with music and art, and my dad was a math teacher, so there was math and numbers, and it all just flowed together. My sisters were very active, and it never occurred to me, like, I must have been in my mid to or late 20s before I even realized that women were not always respected in the workplace. In our current world, or that you wouldn't pay women as much as men. Because I grew up with a very strong mother, strong grandmother, 2 strong sisters, and we were always doing things together. And to his credit, my dad never said that implicitly to be strong you have to put other people down, that your strength doesn't come from the weakness of other people. He was very much a community-minded person. Anyway, so we grew up always making things all the time. My dad would just make something like a little seat that we could sit on with 4 very low friction wheels. And we would like bounce around the house, like on our little scooters. And it cost him very little to make it. And then we would just play for hours doing that.
Yeah.
He'd put a little motor in a box and we would make like spin art with markers, or we would put a Frisbee on it and then get the Frisbee to fly off. We would just do stuff.
Oh, wow.
So I grew up making things, and then
very creative mind.
And you see the world is not set in the way it is. It's all made up. It's all being made up.
Yes.
Every day of our lives, it's a collective hallucination. And and it could be made up very differently and very better than it is. So that's
go ahead.
So okay, so then we read a lot, my sisters and I, as kids. So I was always reading history and literature and poetry and comparative religion, everything, you know. We would go to the library and walk back like with our little arms holding the maximum number of books they'd let a kid check out is 20. We all walked home with 20 books every day. And so, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, but because both, you know, but and my mother volunteered a lot when she wasn't teaching, but we had our parents' time, love, attention, and safety. And that's all that you really need. That's all that anybody
had a very rich cultural life. Yes.
In that way.
Yes.
So then I went to college and I went to 4 universities. And I got scholarships to all of them. So I wasn't charging my parents a lot of money, but that's in those days before the internet. If you really wanted to learn a lot of stuff, you kind of had to travel around, I found, and read.
I still think you should.
I started in engineering, but it wasn't taught that well at the school I started in. It seemed more like you were just using spreadsheets and optimizing. You weren't really thinking about how to build things. And I know it's taught better in many schools these days. It just didn't sit for me. And so then I switched to physics to study, okay, how do things really work? And how do things really go together? And that was good. And I stayed with physics through my senior undergraduate year, but I switched my actual major to history and philosophy of science because I took a lot of history and philosophy courses. I still did all the coursework in the senior project that a physics student would do, including, you know, real research. And then I did some graduate work in physics, but also started shifting more toward history, sociology, and anthropology, and did that for several years. I didn't get my PhD. I did publish a lot, but I really wanted to work with my hands and make things. And so I went to work for a few different museums, interactive science and children's museums.
You ever heard of the Museum of Science and Industry?
Well, I was a student at the University of Chicago for a while. And so
I graduated there. Yeah, but you've been to the
my
museum.
goodness.
Yeah.
So that of all the universities I've studied at, Chicago had more of an effect on me. And when we get done talking about me as an artist, I want to talk about a new type of community center that I'm working on and get your opinion on that. Because the biggest problem in America is community. The biggest problem anywhere in the world is community.
Yes.
And this is a very Chicago, sort of like Chicago economic school. We want to make the world a better place. It's going to be done through the way people really work. You have to understand psychology. You have to understand markets and capitalism. That's the way it's going to happen. That's sort of Obama's position. I think Chicago shaped Obama in his years teaching there more than where he studied prior.
You've answered my question. You really didn't consider yourself an artist nor a sculptor.
We made stuff all the time. Yeah.
But you're very creative. It is a type of art to me. Your product now is artistic.
I think so. I like to think so. And I can draw and I can sculpt and I can think of a new thing. And I'm getting better. I've gone back to school to learn figure drawing and hand sculpting, and I'm not great at those. But I do that in my spare time, or I'll take I'll sit on the couch with the family, and we're watching TV or a movie, and I have a spool of wire, and I'll make a bust of our son Duncan with his curly hair and his nose and everything. And then I stuck it on top of his computer monitor where he plays video games. Like the bust of Beethoven on top of the piano that Linus plays. So I'll always be making things like that. And when we've had some really tough times in my company, like, nearly going bankrupt, and do we have enough money to pay people? There's always been tough times. We're in a pretty stable position now. But during those tough times in the past, I've always said, I did a little looking into my heart. I'm like, I could be in prison, and I'd be one of those guys who like draws on the walls, or like has a quarter and it's like file, what people do. And I don't want to make light of the prison experience. I shouldn't be using that, but I down to my last penny, I'm a maker more than I'm anything else. I will always be trying to create something to give other people enjoyment and meaning.
When you first started making things, you started making one particular object or a sculpture, and you just let it grow. Did you intend to grow to this big conglomerate that you are, or it just evolved naturally?
It evolved naturally, but I had the intention. I could see what was so. I actually think now, if I had to do it, well, let's get back to that. I kind of thought that it had to be a group project. I knew that a lot of artists, I knew I would have more ideas than I could do myself. And that I didn't want to, what's that?
That's interesting. That's a different approach, because a lot of artists wouldn't think that way. That's interesting.
But if you think historically, like a lot
I'm not saying it's wrong, but I can see why you're not an artist. You're thinking on a whole nother level.
A lot of the art is managing a group creativity, to make something that one person couldn't do by themselves.
Yes.
Some frustrations now, because like we've attracted people who are some people are just very rigid in their thinking, and I'm like, you're in the wrong business. And yet they keep showing up, and I'm like, no, this isn't the right place. They keep wanting to document everything, and I'm like, well, we typically don't do everything twice. We need to document it to fix it and to build upon it, but stop pretending we're going to make 10,000 of these, because we're not. And then they want more process, and it happens as people get older. For some of our new hires, we're looking for people who maybe have a little bit more of an artistic background, because they kind of get it. Artists are actually very practical people. I'm sure you realize that art, like Michelangelo had to figure out how to pave the road to Pietrasanta to get the marble when everyone else bailed on him. Like artists do get things done.
Some,
right.
The art world.
I like people, and I like talking with people.
Yes.
And so, what I like to do is I'll make a little mock-up, and I'll talk to somebody, and I'll let them take the next step, and I'll say, but maybe you could make this a little bit more like that.
So now that you're president, okay, so let's go back. So when you first created your company, you were doing all the designs with.
Yes. And I still lead the designs, but
that's
more
what I
and more
was
people do
wondering.
everything. So it grew roughly one person per year. So we're 28 years old. We've got about 28 or 30 people. And so it just grew slowly and organically. And it started with me doing everything. Like I did the electronics, I did the welding, I did the woodworking, I reviewed contract, I did everything. And then, I'd hire one person, and it just grew very slowly. And there's a lot of speed bumps along the way as you try to grow a company. It was a big deal to grow beyond, say, 15 people, because 15 people I can supervise directly. But beyond that, now we have departments and project management structure.
So if you don't make one sculpture or project more than once, why would you need all those people?
Well, it's like a band. Think about a musical group. Often the lead singer can kind of plunk out a tune on the piano or the guitar to write the song. But when they go to record it, they want like the best bass player, they want people who are like studio musicians. So our welders are better, they're better at welding than I was and could be if I'm only welding a few hours a day. Like I'm jumping between all of these different things. And so I have really good people in every specific area that do a better job at everything than I can. And I know enough about those areas to know what is possible, but they're better than I am at everything, electronics, welding.
Fascinating.
So one of the things that's happened really in the last 5-10 years is there's been a growth in these companies that will handle the fabrication, marketing, and installation of art. There's a half a dozen around the country now. And so you no longer need a company the size of Creative Machines. So to do that, and we are actually subbing out some of our own fabrication to companies that specialize in particular areas. And then doing what only we do best. But every day I sort of question, that's a huge payroll we have here. And, you know, I like everybody here, but the industry is moving toward more of a network, like an artist and a project manager, or artist and one assistant. They make a mock-up and then they work with this company and that company's working with this
that's
company.
what most
That's
artists
the theory.
do.
That's how it's supposed to work in
But
reality.
a lot of artists, that's how they function.
Yeah. And
do
so
you
I
have
could see
any,
that.
do you have any robotics?
Well, we have some CNC machines, which are essentially robots.
Robotics, yeah. So you
If
can
we
have
do
a
this thing
robot
that's
do
like,
a lot.
yeah, you know what's interesting? Among the people I have, if there's a job where there's like crates of beautiful glass spheres and their job is to pop it into this stainless steel matrix to make a beautiful image, that's kind of the job that people like. Don't tell me that people do not like repetitive work. People like, because then they chat with their buddies and then they go home at 5:01 p.m. People kind of like
relaxing.
that. It's relaxing, working at a low level with your hands in a pleasant environment, and then they take their 2 breaks and then they take their lunch. But there's not passion there, you know? Anyway.
So do you miss, I guess you don't miss, one of my questions I was going to ask, do you miss functioning at the level when you first started as opposed to being a manager? But you never.
Well, I still get to make prototypes. I've made sure that I still get to do stuff. And I'll show you some of them, and I still get to lead the design. So I like that. You know,
lead all the designs that come in.
Yeah, I lead all the designs.
That's good.
And I'd like to find more people who will do that. And we're making progress in that regard. What's interesting about looking back in time is that your own personal history is tied up with, like, that's why people are nostalgic. The past really wasn't better than the present, but people were younger and healthier and in love and had all their teeth in the past. So of course the past was better. So, you know, there were some satisfactions, and time has a way of polishing out the rough spots, and you only remember the high points. But I had to work many more hours. I don't know that I was necessarily doing as good work or able to. It was more of a struggle back then. So I have to say it's better now, but that doesn't mean I don't want to fix the struggles. I think.
Yeah. So who do you sell your pieces to, your sculptures to? Do you make them and then sell them, or do people have a concept and come to you, or both?
Well, actually, we come up with the concepts, but often it's a dialogue. So I'd say about a third of it is we respond to RFQs put out by municipalities and developers. It used to be about a half was RFQs, but I don't know, we go through different phases where a lot of times we don't make the final round because there's new artists on the scene and they're doing amazing, huge things for very low cost, and they will burn out in a few years. I don't know what to say. But about a third of it is that. And those are great because they give you access to public spaces that you just wouldn't have. Like, you know, we did the
like airport
justice. What's that?
Like an airport.
Yeah. unique sites that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
Maybe a third of it is art consultants and developers come to us. And then with a specific site, and they may have something in mind. They'll have seen something we did in the past. I'll say, could you do something like this? Or they'll just say, hey, what would you propose for here? And that's really nice. And then separately, I develop a lot of concepts that don't have a use yet, because by the time you're asked for a competition or whatever, there's not enough time to really come up with things and really play with them.
Just a
So I'm
select.
always working on prototypes. I have some parts at my desk that I'm making I'm making a camper van mostly for my wife, and I have a trip coming up, and
a camper van?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's done. I can get back to I have this idea for an art piece that I want to do, and the parts are just sitting at my desk, but I'll get to it hopefully.
Oh my
Maybe
God.
I'll work on it a little bit later today. And then the other third, though, is a new area we're trying to get involved early in projects where we help people plan for the art that will go into that
space.
And so we did a project with the Denver Theater District. They paid us to just come up with concepts, not just for one or two pieces, but for a whole district. So people would know that they were in the district and it was be applicable to all the spaces they have. So we did that.
Nice.
And now we're doing the first art piece. And then we got a job doing a master plan for an adventure park in Oman, which is the Gulf state. And they're really nice there. And we had never done anything but as I said to them, just because we've never done it before, it doesn't mean we're not the most qualified to do it. So we designed that. And now we're designing these sort of sculptural places for a science learning facility in Bisbee. And we don't know what it's going to be. And half of our work is helping them think through, okay, how many visitors are you going to have? What sort of activities? Are they going to come as families? Are they going to come individually? Weekends? Are they going to come after school? Kind of easing into it. And yet, you know, like when Michelangelo would talk with the Pope, or, you know, he'd be like, well, do we want to put a whole lot of artwork on the outside of the church, or do we want to do it up on the roof and whatever? I like these planning things, and sometimes they evolve into art commissions.
Have you ever been in a like a big expo like Miami Basel or something like that?
I went as a tourist to Art Basel Miami in 2021, and I'm talking to a group about renting a building, and we would all kind of do a series of artworks that really link together kind of as a theme, very experiential, possibly about social change and justice, but with an interesting perspective on that. But it takes a lot of money to put that together. So I have never really done that.
I have one more section, if you don't mind, before we go, that I wanted to talk about and you kind of talked about it, but I wanted to talk about your team.
Yeah.
More about your team. And you kind of explained it some, because I was curious before I talked to you, did you have different departments, or did you just hire people and they all work on all the projects and they just have different titles? Because I looked at all of them, I said, wow, this is really big. So I at first I assumed that it was like you have these different sections and one person will work on one part, then it goes to another section, or how do you approach your team?
Well, everybody has a job. The people who do best at Creative Machines are generalists. Like, they understand a lot of areas, but they have to be really good at one thing. And I go back to the analogy of a band or a sports team. Like, you know, it's like, especially on defense and like baseball or football, you can have a player will sometimes play another position. And like, you know, if you brought a real star basketball player to your backyard softball game, I'm sure they'd be better than anybody else. But for like, you know, the highest level of competition, everyone does their own thing. So for instance, a lot of our engineers work on cars at home. So they are very mechanically, they're thinking all the time about the order in which things get added and bolt and weld together. I used to do all of the different fields. our project managers trained as two of our project managers are trained as architects. One of them runs a farm, and a farm is really good preparation for all of the physical and natural, the different time scales that things happen on. But then, you know, like when it comes time to do a project, our engineers are the ones doing the engineering, even though they kind of weld in their garage on the weekends. And then our welders are just spending all day welding, you know, and so they're really the best at that. But then they go home and they may be designing like a new custom car, or they're designing a Burning Man thing or whatever. So generalists who then have an area that they're really good at kind of